love it when people do that. Not that, no.
I'm about to sing. Ooh, good thing I didn't start singing.
Okay. Well, guys, I wish you a good morning. As I've already stated, it's been a fun morning for me in a sarcastic sort of a tone of voice. Technical issues, and just woke up, I just felt unfocused, and just things haven't been going right. So, as I've stated before, I'm a mess today, which is pretty normal, but a little messier than normal.
And Valley's love.
Yeah. At any rate, I want to say thanks to everybody for coming, and for those who are joining online, welcome. We're glad to have you with us, even if it is in a virtual sense. We're going to go ahead and let you know what's going on, because it's important. We've got the men's and women's recovery groups, so if you're suffering from alcohol addiction or drug addiction, or any other sort of addiction, like if you are a perfectionist and you're tired of living under your own iron rule, much less making other people live by it, then this would be a good way to work through that. If you're struggling with pornography or anything, you know, if there's a habit you just can't break and you spent years, maybe decades trying to get free from it, this is a great way to go through it. So come join a group of people who are like-minded, similarly flawed, and committed to each other and helping each other grow up into a little bit more like Jesus. This would be a great way. And so ladies, for you, that's Mondays at 7 p.m. In the, I want to say the Civic Center. That's not right. It's the Reunion Center. So a block south of the Comanche Courthouse. Men, it's the same place, but it's Tuesday nights at 7:30. All right? So 7:30. Also, want to say that we've got 2 classes going on Thursday afternoon, evening, and that starts at 4 p.m., and that's Embrace Grace. And the first class is for single mothers who are expecting, or if you find yourself in that point in life, you find yourself maybe without as much support as you'd like to have to be able to go into motherhood with, then this is a great place to go and build friendships and have not only a group of young ladies come beside you and help you out and encourage you, but it's also the whole church gets behind that. So we just want to encourage you, if you're in that situation, come out at 4 o'clock, and at 5:30 starts Embrace Life, and it's really just, the main difference is that it is intended for single mothers. So if you again find yourself in need of a support structure and you've got kids of your own, this is a great class to come to, learn about who God says you are the beauty that life has to offer, and again, find that support that you're looking for, that you need, that we all need. So I guess with that, Horace, you can go ahead and call the announcements done, and I guess I'll step out of the way, and we will begin to worship. So here we go. You guys are welcome to stand. You're welcome to sit. However you feel comfortable, just do it. And if you feel like what's comfortable changes in the middle of the songs, you sit down or stand up or whatever it is you want to do. So, at any rate, we're going to go ahead and get things rolling. The first song is going to be Love Came Down. If my heart is overwhelmed and I cannot hear your voice, I hold on to what is true, though I cannot see. If the storms of life they come and the road ahead gets steep, I will lift these hands in faith and I will believe. And I remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your son. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. And I am yours. I am forever yours. Mountain high or valley low, I sing out about my soul. I am yours. I am forever yours. When my heart is filled with hope and every promise comes my way, and when I feel your hands of grace to rest upon me, staying desperate for you, God, staying humbled at your feet, I will lift these hands in praise and I will believe. I remind myself of all that you've done gonna do Graves in the Gardens next. Might be my current favorite. Oh, I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty grace, treasures and faith, never enough. And you came along, put me back together. Every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. No, I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws, but you see them all. You still call me friend. You're the God of the mountain, the God of the valley. There's not a place that your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. A lot of good stuff in there. I like that one. All right. All this pain, wonder if I'll ever find my way. Wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all?
light up, mountains you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I find dreams to 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
I want to sing that chorus one more time. Let's go.
Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I find, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Amen.
You guys can take a seat. Well, in case anyone's tuning in late online, or for anyone that came in a little bit behind, I am a mess today. So pray for me. We will see how this goes. In fact, after I finished getting things ready up here, which was later than it ever should have been, and went downstairs to come greet people as you come in, I even walked outside and asked Caleb, "Would you preach today?"
And what did he say?
Hey, he said, so long as he can preach about whatever he wants, no strings attached. And so I said, you can preach on anything you want, so long as it's
Yes.
biblical and gospel centered. And he said, those are strings. I said, no, those are chains. So yeah. Anyway, we're going through this series called Ordinary Faith in Extraordinary Times, which, again, I know I've said, but I didn't really plan it this way, but it followed right after our series in the book of James, which was all about faith for the real world, which was a good follow-up because a lot of what we covered basically went with this idea in James anyway, that we need faith to work every single day. It doesn't matter whether you're having a good day or a bad day, whatever life brings you, you need to be able to act like Jesus no matter what, because, well, A, it's good for you, your life will go better. Not to say it'll be easy, so don't get me wrong there, but it will go better. Matter of fact, he even tells us to rejoice when we hit hard times in the book of James at the very start. Something I am still working on. But at any rate, and so for us to go from, hey, your faith needs to work at any time, saying, okay, even the extraordinary times, when life is just, to use an overused word, epically bad, when it just seems like life is chaos, when you're telling somebody about it and life is, and they're just like, okay, glad I'm not you. faith doesn't work in those circumstances, I mean, obviously you're in a hard spot, and life is going to go downhill. And it's not to say that life is going to get better, because if you look at Daniel's life, when he's a kid, maybe even just barely into adulthood, in the Jewish sense of the term, he might have been, anywhere from 12 to maybe in his early 20s, maybe. But at any rate, his hometown is conquered, and he is carried off to Babylon, a foreign land, and he's made to serve a foreign king who worships weird gods. Who doesn't? This guy doesn't give a rip about Daniel, his people, or his God. And so Daniel is in an extraordinary circumstance. In a sense of the term, he'd become a slave. He wasn't free to go back home where he'd grown up. He wasn't free to go and work for whatever his dad's business was, like traditional Jewish life led us to do, or led you to do. So all of that was off for him. He could not do that. And so in a sense, he was a slave. Obviously, it's a very loose sense, and I'm sure anyone who is an actual slave would probably complain about my using that term that way, but regardless, he doesn't have complete freedom. And I'm here to tell you that Daniel's life didn't get better. He stayed in Babylon his whole life long, and he never got to go home. He was always a foreigner in a foreign land, trying to worship his God in hostile circumstances. Trying to be faithful to the commands that God's given him, even when his job, his culture is there pressuring him. And I'm not talking about the kind of pressure we feel. I mean, we get it, because the world lives one way and the church is supposed to live a different way. We understand that idea that we're supposed to live according to the morals that God gives, and there's pressure that comes from television, from music, from everything you can think of that the world puts out. They're pressuring us to live just like they are. And that's our life. But he's in this culture where the culture is, if anything, it's openly hostile towards Judaism. I mean, he's part of the conquered people. That's just the way it was. And historically, the Jews were the most hated ethnic people ever. I mean, we see that back in World War II with Nazi Germany. It wasn't enough to just send the Jews off to concentration camps, but anyone who helps them, anyone who's soft towards them, gets sent away to the concentration camps. So Christian, atheist, whoever they are, if they were kind to the Jews, you were in danger. You were taking your life into your hands. And this is something that is, that's a more extreme end of things. The Jews have been on the raw end of the stick for pretty much the whole time. There's the countries that surrounded them didn't like them. Matter of fact, right back down to almost the very beginning of the Jewish nation, back with Abraham's kids. He had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, and these two hated each other. And so right down to that. It's just all the way through history. They're hated. And so Daniel is in this culture that's at least passively hostile, if not openly hostile, towards the Jews. And that's his circumstance. And that brings us to the story that we're at. Daniel's in the situation. He has served King Nebuchadnezzar for we don't know how many years, but years. He has lived a life that has honored God. He has followed God's commands. And when Nebuchadnezzar needed answers, when God touched Nebuchadnezzar's life, God used Daniel to provide those answers. When the world could not provide the answers, God gave the answers to Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel. But Nebuchadnezzar's out of the picture. How many of your years and how much ever respect Daniel had, and I think it's pretty clear from the way he talked to Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel had respect and honored Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar's dead and gone. And there's another king. And we're talking about this week in chapter 5 about King Belshazzar, which in the process of doing my research on this, I found out he was not truly king. He was actually the regent. His father was the king, but his father was away in the Arabic regions of the Babylonian Empire trying to lock things down there, and I don't know what his agenda was. But he was focused his attentions elsewhere. And so he left his son as regent in charge of the empire there at the capital. And so that's Belshazzar. He's not really number one. He's not truly the king. He's the regent, as we would use that term. But the Bible's calling him king here because for all practical purposes he is. There's only his dad who can come back home and overrule him. So at any rate, that takes us into this. And if you've ever heard the saying, the writings on the wall, that's what this story is about. This is where the origin of that phrase came. So, let's take a look at it. Chapter 5, verse 1 of Daniel says, Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles and his wives, his concubines, drank from them. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So, right there, we see things start out. Belshazzar is throwing this great, huge feast. How many 1,000 people? Plus his wives and concubines, how many ever that is. That's big. That's a lot of food. I'd hate to cater that party. But man, he's just there, and he, for whatever reason, and we can only make guesses about why, but they bring out stuff that had been plundered from the temple of God in Jerusalem. So back when Nebuchadnezzar conquered it, you remember I told you that they took some of the things from the temple, but not everything. Mm-hmm. This is some of what they took. These cups that were intended for holy use in God's temple. It wasn't just, hey, we're having a dinner party at church. These are the cups we're going to use. No, these were ritual, ceremonial things. They had been set aside for very special purposes. And so Nebuchadnezzar comes in, conquers it, takes that stuff, and years, if not decades later, we see Belshazzar pull these things out. Like I said, I don't know what made him decide to pull these things out. I can only make guesses. And my guess is that either he himself or others who he was trying to impress had a bone to pick with the Jewish people. And so I think he was wanting to kind of rub salt in the wound. Like, here we are, we're talking about our gods, and we're going to bring out, we're going to use the cups that were used for the holy, only God that there really is. Like I said, that's just a guess. I don't know if that was what it was, but regardless, we find that he was taking what is holy to glorify what is unholy. And I'm just here to tell you, God doesn't have a long temper when it comes to that sort of thing. When we take what is holy and we use it to glorify what is unholy. So, let's take a look. Let's plunge on. Verse 5 says, Suddenly the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. The king shouted for the enchanters. Well, hold on, I'm going to stop there. Just verse 5, right there, we see divine intervention. God seems to have a way of wanting to touch the lives of the kings of Babylon at this point in time. I don't know if he did that through other ages, through other monarchies, I don't know. But for whatever reason, God has a lesson he's got to teach this Belshazzar. So there's divine intervention, and we see that Belshazzar, despite being king, despite having an army there, has a very human reaction. If I saw a hand out of nowhere just appear and start writing on a wall, I'd be a little freaked out too. Let's be honest. I don't think any of us would say, oh yeah, hey, would you pass the rolls please? I just don't see that happening. But he was seriously scared. I mean, knees knocking, his legs giving out from under him. He's frightened. And so go figure, he starts looking for answers. But Belshazzar, being who he is, and part of the culture that he's a part of, he goes looking for answers in the wrong place. So let's look at verse 7. The king shouted for the enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought before him. He said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But when the king's wise men had come in, none of them could read the writing or tell him what it meant. So the king grew even more alarmed, and his face turned pale. His nobles, too, were shaken. So right there we see Belshazzar is going to the wrong places to look for answers. This is pretty normal reaction when you come right down to it. Because if we're honest, I think that's kind of most of us. When we have a problem come up, we start looking in the wrong places for the answers.
We call the wrong people sometimes.
Sometimes we do. We call the wrong people. This is why we have addiction as a rampant problem through our culture. It's just and it's why some people can't seem to get into a healthy relationship. They're going to people looking for something that person inherently cannot provide. And sometimes they're so far from being able to provide it, it's a little scary. But at any rate, we go to the wrong place. Whatever place it is that we go looking for, we don't go to God. That's Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar, as far as we know, has had no experience with God, really kind of hasn't had anything directly to do with Daniel or with God himself. And so it's understandable. I mean, if you run into the average atheist, they're not going to go looking to God for answers to their problems. It'd be a very, very rare atheist, as a matter of fact. So, at any rate, he just wants answers. Honestly, again, this weird little hand comes floating and writes a message on the wall. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, this is a message. I need to know what the heck this thing says. So he goes, and he can't find the answer. None of those people can. I don't know for sure what language this is, but the words that we'll see later on are in Aramaic, which is basically like saying American or Southern. It's a dialect of the Jewish language. It's basically slang. It's not proper English. It's got all the words that our English teachers told us we're not supposed to be saying. That's Aramaic. And the Bible is written in both Hebrew, which is the proper language, and Aramaic, which is, like I said, the more common vernacular. But these words are part of the Aramaic language, and I don't know if it was written with the traditional Jewish alphabet and no one there among the Babylonian wise men could read that, or if it was something strange and took divine interpretation. I just don't know. It doesn't give us enough to be sure. At least not that I can find anyway. So, at any rate, fortunately, Belshazzar's mom has a better head on her shoulders than he does. So she says in verse 10, "But when the queen mother heard what was happening, she hurried to the banquet hall. She said to Belshazzar, 'Long live the king! Don't be so pale and frightened. There's a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor, the king, your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief over all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, fortune tellers of Babylon. This man Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, has exceptional ability and is filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret dreams and explain riddles and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means.'" So Mom, at least, has a little perspective. She remembers Daniel and the extraordinary things that followed Daniel around. And so she says, "Call Daniel. I think he'll have the answer." So that's good. At least Mom's got a head on her shoulders. Verse 13. "So Daniel was brought in before the king. The king asked, 'Are you Daniel, one of the exiles brought from Judah by my predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar? I have heard that you have the spirit of the gods within you, and that you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom. My wise men and enchanters have tried to read the words on the wall and tell me their meaning, but they cannot do it. I am told that you can give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read these words and tell me their meaning, you will be clothed in purple robes of royal honor, and you will have a gold chain placed around your neck. You will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom.'" So right there, this guy's basically saying, "I'm going to put you directly under me." Remember, he's not the king, the true king. He's in charge. He's, I guess, the prince, the heir apparent, if you will. He's supposed to be king after his dad kicks a bucket, or I guess resigns maybe. But regardless, he's number two. He's saying, "I'm going to bring you as high as I possibly can without replacing myself." So, Daniel's promised a more wonderful reward than even Nebuchadnezzar ever gave him. So I think that alone tells us just how scared Belshazzar is. But at any rate, verse 17, it picks up, and Daniel gives his reply. And this is where I really want to bring out this idea, is that in extraordinary times, ordinary faith tells the hard truth even when it is hard. So, let's look at what Daniel's reply is. Daniel answered the king, "Keep your gifts, or give them to someone else. But I will tell you what the writing means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that people of all races and nations and languages trembled before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill and spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor and disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven from human society. He was given the mind of a wild animal, and he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. You are his successor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all this. Yet you have not humbled yourself, for you proudly defied the Lord of heaven and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You, your nobles, and your wives and concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see, nor hear, nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So, God has sent this hand to write this message. This is the message that was written. And I'm probably going to kill pronouncing these words, so I'm just going to fake it as well as I can. Mene, tekel, parson. This is what these words mean. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Parson means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So, right there, we see Daniel's response. Now, if you guys can remember back, if you want to look back, I'm not going to go there myself, but look at the times that Daniel addressed Nebuchadnezzar. Now, don't get me wrong, he was not disrespectful to Belshazzar. But the way he talked to Nebuchadnezzar and the way he talked to Belshazzar was on two different levels. He was not disrespectful to Belshazzar, but he was very, very respectful. Like you'd expect to be when you're talking to a king who holds your life in his hands. It was very elaborate, very flattering, and all I can guess is that Daniel actually respected King Nebuchadnezzar. I don't think he respected Belshazzar. I can't say that for certainty, but that's what I see in the way he addressed the two. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind, is that part of what Daniel told Belshazzar is that, he relayed the story we read about in the last chapter about how Nebuchadnezzar had been brought low, made like an animal, took his sanity away, and then basically 7 periods of time, presumably years, later, he brought Nebuchadnezzar back into his kingship. And so there was this period that Nebuchadnezzar just lost it. And he'd done that because he'd been so arrogant before God that God needed to humble him in the most extreme, honestly the most extreme way I can think of in the Bible. And Belshazzar's pretty much in the same place. But he knew the story about what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know if Nebuchadnezzar was his grandfather or what, but regardless, he knew. Nebuchadnezzar was not shy about explaining why once he came back to his senses. He glorified God after that. It's almost like, if you read the end of chapter 4, it's almost like he took the pen from Daniel or whoever's writing this book and wrote it in his own words. It's that clear. I don't think he did, but regardless, the message is that clear that Nebuchadnezzar was trying to convey that God is awesome and I am less. Belshazzar knew this, didn't care. Now part of me, because I'm in the position I'm in, recognizes that I think at least some of that responsibility lies with Nebuchadnezzar. That it's our job to pass on the lessons we've learned to the next generation and the next generation. As many generations as we get to touch. Matter of fact, we see, biblically speaking, that if there's a godly person in your family, someone who maybe broke chains of whatever oppression has been plaguing that family, comes to God, humbles themselves, lives a godly life, we can see that legacy last 100 years. That's a humbling thought to think that the life you live could be affecting people 100 years after you're gone. Not just your kids, not just your grandkids, not even just your great-grandkids. It can go that far. It can go beyond that. And so I think Nebuchadnezzar dropped the ball a little bit. I think he failed to really drive home the lessons that he learned into his kids, his grandkids, his people as a whole. And so Belshazzar, despite knowing the story, didn't care about it. Maybe he thought it was fiction. I don't know. But he didn't learn the lessons of previous generations. And that is the burden that lies on each of us, to learn the lessons that our parents, our grandparents, previous generations tried to teach us. It's like the old saying goes, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. It's so very true, especially when you're talking about family history. We see that very clearly. And so, as parents, we need to pass those lessons on to the next generations. As offspring ourselves, we need to be willing to humble ourselves and learn the lessons of previous generations. And honestly, that doesn't end when you become 18. It doesn't end when you become 43 either. So no matter how old we are, we still need to be willing to take those lessons and learn from them. Belshazzar was not. And so Daniel laid it all out. Basically says, your days are numbered. God has measured you and found you lacking, and that your kingdom is going to be handed over. And it is. Verse 29 says, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So there Daniel gets the reward that was promised him. But you know how long that lasted? Hours. No kidding. Look at the next verse. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Hours. Sometimes God's judgment takes a while for it to fall. Sometimes it's nearly instantaneous. Belshazzar had been found wanting. He didn't have what it took to be a good king. And frankly, I don't think he had what it took to be a good man. There was no sense of humility about him. There was a sense of not only superiority, but I'm going to rub salt in the wound by taking the holy objects from God's temple that have been dedicated to him, and I'm going to use them and for common purposes, and I'm going to praise other gods while I'm using them. We use the term perverse or perversion a lot. We generally think of it in one sense of the term. But you stop and you think about it, that word means that you take something that was good and you twist it into something that was never meant to be, that is wrong. That's what the term perverse or perversion means. Well, guess what? Here's a perversion right here. Belshazzar took what was holy and he made it unholy. Well, as much as he can. You can't really undo what God has done. But Daniel lays it out, like I said, in extraordinary times, ordinary faith is willing to tell the hard truth, even when it's hard. Because honestly, you give a message like that, hey, your days are numbered, you're about to not be king anymore, there's a good chance that king just might change his mind about rewarding you and instead execute you. But Daniel stood up and he said it. He didn't pull punches. He wasn't disrespectful when he did it. That's something we need to learn, because generally when we start telling hard truths to people who need to hear those hard truths, we start getting disrespectful. Our passion, our anger, our wounds that have come from whatever it is just get the better of us, and we start insulting the person. That's never the way God wants it to be. We address the issue, we speak those hard truths, but we do it respectfully, or at least without disrespect. It's kind of like Ephesians says, we speak the truth in love. If you're being disrespectful, you are not being loving. Daniel laid it out, but he was never at any point in time disrespectful. So we need to be willing to step up and do that, because Daniel is a prophet, and he has been given so far a handful of messages to give to kings. That's always dangerous business, giving messages from God to kings, because kings have a long track record of killing the messenger. And so it's a dangerous profession, but this is something God called him to, even in the middle of his normal day job of serving as an administrator in Babylon. He still stepped up and he did what God called him to do. For him, that was multiple times. For us, it may just be one time. I don't know. I don't know what your life's going to hold. But regardless, this is a role that Daniel was called into, that God had placed on him. And he was willing to step up and do it, even when there was a lot of risk. Even when it wasn't just his life on the line. I mean, honestly, if Daniel had said something that had so angered a king that king decided to, he could have ordered the wholesale slaughter of the Jewish people. Not saying, obviously, he didn't, but he could have. And there was at least one instance where it wasn't just Daniel, it was Daniel and his friends. We saw that in chapter 1. So the risk they took to try to honor God, there were multiple lives on the line. We may never reach a point where what we've got to do comes down to, okay, I can obey God and die, or maybe die anyway, or I can go the way of the world and live. We may never come to that choice. But if we do, what's the choice going to be? Are we going to be following Daniel's example and living a faith where every day we're working to honor God? We're trying as hard as we can to follow him and just do what he tells us to do? Or are we going to go the way of the world? And it's a lot easier that way. But I promise it's kind of like saving money. It hurts in the short term because you don't have that money, but in the long term it pays off. So, are we going to bank with the world, or are we going to bank with God? All right, let's pray. Lord God, I am humbled again that you can take someone who can be as big a mess as I am and still use me and speak to me. Sometimes I wonder why it is you still want to have anything to do with me. But you're faithful. You're so faithful. You never once abandoned me. Never once left me alone. And I'm grateful. And I just ask today that you'd help us to be able to stand up in those hard times and be able to speak the truth that we need to speak. Because God, your truth changes lives. It changes society. It changes kingdoms. So, help us to have the courage to stand up. Do what you told us to do. Not compromise. You deserve nothing less, God. Let our lives honor you, just like we sang earlier. I am yours. So God, we are yours. Help us to act like it. It's in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, guys, that's it. Well, thank you for coming out, and I guess I'll see you next time.